Wow. Wow. And Adria, I just love the phrase a simple triple. Somehow that phrase itself appeals to me. But thank you, Adria.
Welcome.
Gorgeous. All right, friends, we're going to continue with our study of Psalm 15, and we're going to start with altar and then move through some of the other texts we have. We won't spend a lot of time on altar. I want to point out a few things that he does. And again, this is the Robert Alter book. He has translated the entire Tanakh. He is he of all of those that we study, he's the one who's a professional translator, and he has a deep grasp of the original Hebrew, and I'll keep repeating this so folks understand. And if you have questions, don't hesitate to ask. But especially for those who are newer, Robert Alter's goal in his translation is to get as close to the biblical Hebrew as he can, not by saying what a word is necessarily totally literally, but by trying to create the format and syntax and rhythm as well of the Hebrew, which is a very unusual way to approach biblical Hebrew, honestly, and one of the things that makes him stand out. Psalms was, I think, maybe one of the first books he did. He has gone on since then to do the entire Tanakh. Huge project. Okay, so it's Robert Alter.
So you're going to start us with the altar?
Yes, we're going to
You're
start
not
with
going
the
to
altar.
leave us at the altar.
I'm not going to leave you at the altar. I'm hanging in there with everybody. But I want to show people what I do is that I keep next to me a basic Hebrew English translation. So I honestly for the Hebrew, so that I could refer back and forth because again, altar doesn't include the Hebrew. So let's look at Hebrew altar for Psalm 15. I don't see it. Does other
Oh, you
people
don't
see
see
it?
it? Okay, I'm sorry. Put it
No,
up. I'm
sorry.
sorry. Let me try that again. Do we see it now?
Beautiful.
Okay.
So Robert Alter. So first, again, the discipline of approaching a psalm that's been translated or interpreted by somebody else. We always look to see, first of all, do they do all the verses? Is there a sense of keep maintaining that architecture? Yes. Alter always will have all the verses in the order of the verses numbered, so you could quickly see which verse is referring to which in the Hebrew. And Alter also always includes the superscription. In this case, he translated as Mizmor LeDavid, a psalm of David, and he translated as a David psalm, which goes back to that issue that we've said before. A David psalm for him more accurately reflects the idea that it's in a school of David, not necessarily written by King David himself. More that it's like a style, a genre, a tipus, a type. Now you'll notice where does he have the number for Pasuk Aleph for verse 1? Very strange. But you'll see what he does is that he includes the superscription, but by putting the 1 after the superscription, he's kind of indicating that it is a superscription. He doesn't see it really as integral to verse 1. So it's not just a fluke that the one where this has it, and that's so he sees it as a superscription. Sometimes he'll include the superscription. Okay, so that's the first thing that we notice. Alter, he keeps the architecture, he keeps the original 5 verse structure, he keeps the reference to the superscription, and always translate this as a David psalm. When Alter wants to refer to Yud He Vav He, he will use the small. Why can't I ever remember what this is called, Harold?
Initial caps, small caps.
Initial caps, small caps, Lord. So we could go back and know that wherever that reference to God is, he's talking about the big Yud He Vav He 4-letter name of God. And he indicates as the original the original way that we read it, a comma after Lord. So it's clearly being addressed to Yud He Vav He, right? And then what he does in his formatting is that he really shows us the biblical parallelism in a way that makes it super clear. And if yesterday when I talked about the biblical parallelism, it wasn't clear to you, wow, the way that Alter, this is one of the things I love about Alter, is that he really helps you see in the English the biblical parallelism. 2 phrases, one after the other, which has similarities and some differences, sometimes intensification, sometimes explanation, sometimes antithetical. 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 Antithetical is not a word, right? I don't think so. Okay, so so here we see the biblical parallelism. Who will sojourn in your tent? Who will dwell on your holy mountain? So clear in English. Now, does anybody not see that, or any questions about that? Because there's no clear explanation, or no clear example of that, and I really want folks to understand that. So you see, both starts with the who will, so it's asking the same question repeatedly, and in the Hebrew we see it. It says, "Mi yagor, mi yishkon," who will sojourn. So the differences here are both of the verbs, and then where we'll be doing that, right? So who will sojourn in your tent? Who will dwell on your holy mountain? And we talked about the contrast between tent and holy mountain. So you can see that. So are there, Harold, does anybody have questions about biblical parallelism?
No, I will just point out that there's some questions about where the numbers are. This is taken from the Kindle version. Marcia's telling me in the printed version they are all on the left.
Oh,
So,
interesting.
so it's
Okay.
like that.
Oh, yeah, I see that.
Not
That's
about the
interesting.
parallelism. Not about the parallelism.
Okay, just so I hope that's clear to everybody, because this is a beautiful, beautiful example. Then on to verse 2. So the psalm asks with a question, and again, it's been pointed out, in contrast to the previous psalms, which are descriptions of evil in our world, here's the question. So who will be able to be in a place of holiness? And we'll explore with some of the other commentaries and translators different understandings of tent and holy mountain, but for this purpose, so altar translates tamim. Remember, we talked about tam meaning some kind of simple, and Yael told us that in modern Hebrew it could even mean naive, a little bit of a like a simpleton. So here, altar talks about blameless. He who walks blameless. Wow, that's a pretty big. As we talked about, these are very high degrees of righteousness, but they're aspirational. And I think this is a description of what that would mean. So again, we talk about this is a three-part verse. Who is somebody who is going to be able to experience being in holiness, walks blameless, does justice, speaks the truth in his heart. Again, very verbal. If you look, so there's active. These are very active verbs. And for the third of this tripartite verse, speaks truth in his heart. Remember, we saw that in the Hebrew it was a little odd. Dover emet bilvavo. So I think the Safaria, I can't remember, said acknowledges or something. But here, Alter wants us to understand from his perspective. He thinks the psalmist is saying, speaks. So again, the emphasis that it's not only actions, it's also words are important. 3, who slanders not with his tongue, again, speech, nor does his fellow man evil, lo asa l're'ahu ra'a, nor bears reproach for his kin. So he's translating krovo, which means close, as kin. So again, repeating, and you see how verses 2 and 3 both have this three tripartite structure. Again, Alter makes it so easy to see the structure of the Psalms. I love him for this. His understanding of it. And there are controversies, but I really love this. 4, again, we now go from, we have walking, acting, speaking, doing, and then in 4, in 4, nivzeh be'enav, debased in his eyes is repugnant. What does that mean? And those v'et yireh yud he vav he is he honors, but to Lord fears, again the yud he vav he, he gives honor. So in other words, Alter is reading what's a little complicated in the Hebrew, that those who are not doing what this psalm describes, the righteous person finds repugnant. But to those who have Yireh Hashem, which is a very common phrase, awe of or fear of. He honors people who act like that. When he vows to his fellow man, in this is also in 4, Nishba laharav velo yamir. So, in other words, for altar, it's very clear when somebody good to his word is good, right? Somebody who says something doesn't revoke it. If he commits himself, promises, somebody whose word is meaningful, somebody who you can trust what they say, and that's meaningful. So again, a lot about speech. Now, and then very concrete economy. His money, he does not give it interest, and no bribe for the innocent takers. He who does these, and then the final understanding, he who does all of these things in this psalm will not be shaken, or if or altered, will not stumble. Okay, let's take a few comments about this, and then we're going to look at Levi pretty quickly too to go through these. There's some I just wanted to point out a few things.
Yes,
But if there are
Anton
questions,
Gopnik was the first one in chat with an interesting comment about his use of will. Ann Targovnik, if you'd like to unmute yourself.
Sorry, just that in Sepharia it's may sojourn, and in altar it's will. So in verse 1 he repeats will rather than may.
that's very interesting. So that's because the imperfect tense or attribute of a verb in Hebrew, in biblical Hebrew, is pretty open to how it can get translated. So let's keep that in mind as we look at the other translations and see how it. Yep.
And Margot Cates and I believe Lori Krotman are both talking about the different types of the body. You see heart and head and legs and tongue.
Yeah.
And it's a very,
Interesting.
it's a physical,
Yes.
the physicalization and embodiment of all of these different things. And we have some hands up, starting with
Okay, let's
Linda
hear some.
Solomon.
Yes, hi. The thing that caught me is I'm looking at the Mitsuda Tehillim, and I like the fact that they use the word tabernacle here for tent, which I thought was an interesting choice of words. And
Yeah,
and
that
when-
comes from an ohel is sometimes meaning the ohel moed. So because Mitsuda is Orthodox, they will always try to make it reflect what they understand to be the biblical story, which means the tabernacle in the desert. Ohel is bigger than it's not Ohel Moed, so we don't know, but remember, every translation is commentary, is interpretation. So they're trying to advocate for this. I want to point out something that Alter points out. None of these have to do with religious or ritual acts, right? It doesn't talk about the righteous person brings their sacrifices on time or shows up to synagogue on time. It's very interesting how much, and you'll notice this in other places in the Psalms, what righteousness is rarely talked about in the Psalms. It is sometimes as having to do with one's ritual life. These are all very moral, right? You could say that these don't just apply to a specific religious practice, right? It's not saying anything here about keeping kosher or Shabbat these are all very moral categories. And Alter also points out he doesn't use a lot. This psalm doesn't have a lot of metaphor. It's quite direct. There's not. We'll argue and debate and explore different ways to translate words, but it's not a lofty metaphorical poem. You could see pretty, even with some of the differences of trying to parse out what the words mean, it's pretty clear, I think, on overall, right? You kind of get that sense.
Right. In
All
our
right.
Havruta, we all also spoke about the fact that all of the righteousness referred to the relationship between men.
Exactly. Bein Adam
people.
Lechavero, right, among people, as opposed to these are not,
Right.
as I said, they're not ritual or religious as we see, but the Bible doesn't understand a difference between religious and what you're talking about, moral behavior. But it really is all about moral behavior, not about whether or not you keep Shabbos or kashrut or etc. Okay, let's see a few more
Ben
hands.
Saffron.
Yeah, good morning.
Good morning.
Want to make a comment on the word tamim.
Yes.
In the Torah, it usually refers to something unblemished, whole,
Correct.
especially with sacrifices.
Exactly.
So,
So that's why. He sees it as blame. It's a very interesting, and we'll see. A lot of people do very different things with the. And you'll see in Ben, hold that comment. Remember that comment for when we get to Richard Levy. Okay.
okay, thank you.
You'll see. Okay. Great.
Lisa Brown.
The difference here, I have an Art Scroll translation, and they translate that in his heart as from his heart, which to me makes the difference between action, which is a difference in action. Like, what actions are you going to take? Somebody speaks from his heart. And I'm thinking today of people who took a certain political position knowing better. So they knew one thing, but they did another.
Well, and yep, I agree with you. And look at this. In this sentence, even if we struggle over what exactly the walking blameless and doing justice and dover emet levavo, we have, if you look at the three, tamim, tzedek, and emet, right? So tamim is somehow some level of pure, blameless, unblemished. Tzedek is justice, and emet is truth. These are three very strong concepts. These are strong, strong words.
There's been some comments in the chat, particularly one by Marcia Melnick, about verse 5, where all of a sudden we're talking about money. That we've
Yep.
gone from all of these sort of lofty thoughts
Uh-huh.
to lending money and taking bribes.
Pretty interesting, huh? That this is the source of, and this is applied to everybody. I agree. It's very, very interesting. It doesn't just stay. I mean, one could say some of these, like making sure your word is good and not going back on your word. But you're right. The one thing that's true about the Bible that often is overlooked is that it cares a lot about economic justice issues. Yes, there's slavery in the Bible. Yes, all of that. There's some terrible economic, but overall, you're not supposed to know. A judge can't be bribed. You're not supposed to be bribed. You shouldn't lend money at interest, which is a whole other huge topic, because there is a way that the rabbis dealt with that, because it was this issue of not being able to charge interest ends up hurting poor people a lot, because then you can never borrow money, right? So only if you have all the cash yourself could you buy a house. Well, how many of us would have all the cash ourselves if we couldn't borrow money? So there's a very famous law that gets passed about that it's okay to charge interest, but every 50 years it gets wiped out. But that's a whole other story. The most important thing about this piece, and I think Marcia is absolutely right to be struck by this, that economic justice is significant in the biblical moral worldview. It's not just feelings, right? It's if people can't live with dignity and can't pay for the food on their table and put clothes on their backs and live with a roof over their heads. And I find this very moving. And so, Marcia, I'm glad you pointed that out. That economic justice is a significant part of this vision of a moral life.
Wow. And Jack says there's only one reference to the 10 Commandments, which we think of as our rules of living. Number 9, do not give false witness against your neighbor.
Good
The others
point.
are not here.
Good point.
Shep has his hand up.
Well, I wanted to make a comment and a question. The comment is verse 3 almost sounds like hear no evil, see no evil, do no evil.
Yeah.
And my other thing was, Rabbi, I wanted you dealt with it. How did the Jews get around the money lending thing, which is such a big part of European Jewish history? But yeah.
Well, that's a little bit different. This is about yes, in European Jewish history, that the whole issue was that Jews were moneylenders to Christians. And because Christians didn't allow Christians to lend money with interest, so the only people who were allowed to lend money at interest were Jews, which is how Jews got the image in European anti-Semitic cartoons, writings, Jews are seen as usurers. Yes, Jews could not own land in parts of Eastern Europe. They were the professions they were allowed to do was to be a money lender or a tavern keeper. Christians weren't allowed to sell alcohol to other Christians, so you can imagine how much trouble that caused. So Jews were often the tavern keepers or the money lenders, and then became, of course, some of the major bankers as a result of those years.
Also, Rabbi, in Morocco,
Wait,
Muslims
Shep-
couldn't sell alcohol, so Jews did it for them.
Okay, let's keep going because I want to get to.
Sally Kopstein. Sally.
Hi, it's Lynn. I just
Oh,
find it
Lynn, sorry.
interesting that the beginning of the psalm, it opens up with the question, but the last line in the psalm doesn't really refer back to that. It's more generalized. It doesn't say that if you do all of these good things, then you will sojourn in the tent and you will dwell on the holy mountain.
Uh-huh.
And I think
Nice.
did you feel that final line reconciles it, or does it?
Well, let's look at how different. That's a really important question. What's the relation? How do we understand that final line? And our different commentaries and translators deal with it differently. So hold that and watch carefully as we go through the different ones, how they respond, because that's a very important question. What's the relationship of the last line to the rest of the psalm? I think you've noticed by now that's often a question about the psalms. About the last lines often feel like, oh, what is this doing here? Exactly what? Sometimes it's more obvious than others. But let's watch to see how others deal with it.
Barbara Grindell.
Hi. When I read the last line, the person who does all these things will never stumble. I remembered from the beginning, I started with Psalm 11, the upright, the righteous are upright. And obviously, if you're never stumbling, you are upright. So to me, it answered the question of the first two lines. The other thing I want to say is every time I see justice, tzedek in Hebrew, I just go back to Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg with the sign in her office, tzedek, tzedek. And it just makes me feel comforted.
Yeah. Yeah, that quote is from Deuteronomy, I think. Tzedek, tzedek tirdov.
Right.
Justice, justice, you shall pursue, or in King James versions, justice, justice, shout, you pursue, or something like that. But yes, that's from Deuteronomy. Absolutely. All right, let's take one. Can we do one more and then go into
Sure we can. Let's see.
And then we'll see. Then we'll open it up again. I just want to.
Right.
While you have it in your.
Ruthie Berman.
Okay, thank you. When I'm doing the Psalms, I identify it with the here and now for myself.
Uh-huh.
The past couple of Psalms have been very difficult for me. This one is, for me, very beautiful. And I wish I had it in my head when I was bringing up my children, because it certainly balances the right and the wrong in relationship to God, the spirit, whatever it may be at the time. I think this is beautiful.
Yeah.
The other piece is for you, Rabbi. I want you to make an appointment with the U.S. Senate and teach them this psalm.
I know.
They need to learn it. And I so appreciate that this came today in the time of what we're going through, because I think it's so valuable to put out.
It's so sharp, isn't it, in the context of what we are, what this text from 2,500 years ago is telling us about what is a morally correct life. I mean, it speaks to so much. I agree, Ruthie. Thank you. All right, I'm going to pause everybody so we can go into Levy, but keep your hands up so you stay in the front of the queue. And I'll still want to hear it, but let's see if we can go to, if Harold can get us Richard Levy. And again, for those of you, Richard Levy is a contemporary rabbi. And like many of us who are rabbis, he is a student of the text, and he's not the scholar that Robert Alter is. But his goal is to create a spiritual, meaningful. He has a 2-volume collection of the Psalms. I love them. As part of my, every version gives me something. So let's look at Psalm 15 by Richard Levy.
Is it up, Rabbi?
It's up. I see it. Thank you. So again, Richard Levy separates Mizmor LeDavid, so looking at the English, a Psalm of David, and formatting is key. so you see the gap between a Psalm of David and the rest of the pasuk of the verse, which indicates he sees it as somewhat separate. And he will use Adonai whenever he's referring to Yud He Vav He. And he chooses just not to translate it because he thinks the word God is too confusing for people. So he leaves it in a way that just leaves it open. Again, you can see the biblical parallelism. Who may spend time in your with a capital Y for your, into making sure we understand. This is a direct conversation between the speaker and God. This is not about God. This is from me to God. Who may, and here we have may, and going back to that understanding. And again, because it's imperfect, and that the imperfect of the Hebrew, it means it's not a completed action. Perfect means it's completed. It's imperfect is inaccurately translated as future tense. It doesn't necessarily mean future sense, which is why some of them are saying may instead of will. Will kind of makes it, who will dwell, makes it feel much more as simple future tense. Okay, now let's get into some of the interest. Now you're primed to ask the question, how do they translate tamim? So Ben, you see here, he uses the word unblemished, exactly highlighting what Ben said. Tam is used in other parts of the Bible when talking about sacrifices, as a sacrifice has to be tamim, unblemished. So there you go, Ben. Richard Levy agrees with you. And those who walk unblemished, who work justice, poel justice, poel tzedek. Poel is it's even the word for worker in modern Hebrew. Poel is a worker in simple. So, but it's who works justice, and dover emet, who speak truth in their heart. Now that's very interesting. Again, we see this verse is not on the surface totally clear. So that's an interesting understanding. I'm just going to go through the whole thing and then we'll open it up again. And I'll just point out who have not gone about with wagging tongue. Interesting. So what does that mean? Who have not, what I don't like about that is that he's adding a description that he wants us to understand wagging tongue, logo, which isn't in the original Hebrew, but he's trying to say what that means in English, meaning kind of gossipy. Who have not acted fiendishly with a friend, another translation of ra, which means some form of bad, and who have carried no reproach against a neighbor. Now here he's not translating it as Alter did, krovo, as kin. Krovo for Levi doesn't mean necessarily your own family. He's broadening it in terms of neighbor. For in their eyes, a despicable person is despised. So similar to altar, understanding in their eyes, meaning who? Those who walk unblemished. So he's making it clear, in their eyes, those who walk unblemished, a despicable person is despised. So they understand who is despicable, and those people despise them. But they honor those who revere. Again, yireh can mean awe, fear, revere. So he's leaving the word fear and he wants to go for something closer to awe. And that's interesting. Okay, so sometimes when it's translated only as fear, people don't, sometimes we as modern people react against that. So Levi is looking for an English word that will be more understandable to us. That reverence is close to awe, which the biblical author understands that is also, there's some fear in awe. They don't see fear as just a bad thing. It's in the sense of, like you'd be nervous going up and approaching somebody you have such deep respect for that anxiety, a little reverence. So it's interesting. Levi is going for how to make this psalm. But again, Levi sticks to the architecture of the psalm. 5 verses clearly there. If they take an oath which worsens their fortune, they alter it not. Wow, that is a complicated translation, and we're just going to hold on to that. Remember, so nishba lahara, that's a translation of a negative oath, so to speak, or an oath for the bad doesn't get altered. 5, they do not give out silver at interest, going for the more more exact, since kesef means money. Of course, when this would have been written, there was no such thing as a currency as we know it. It would have been silver or other. Nor take bribes that hurt the innocent. Now, notice what, and this, notice that he then puts a gap between those first parts of verse 5 and the final part of verse 5 to indicate it's different than the rest of the psalm. Does everybody see that? That it's this, and this is the kind of the summary, or the now it's the kind of like the stage directions, or the little bit summation, right? Whoever acts in these ways shall never be shaken. All right, so any comments, questions? Let's go back to them now that we've done Alter and Levi.
Laurie Spear points out to us that where Alter says he, the man who, Levy says those. And
Levy tries to get away from the gendered translation. That's another one of his goals. So throughout his translations, you'll find that. That's another excellent, fantastic for noticing that. So as the translations we do, what I try to do when we have the time to do it, and I think that they have valuable things to add, is we go from the closest to the Hebrew to moving to more creative. And this is already a step away from a precise translation, because Levy does remove the gendered reference to the speaker, to the other people. And he does that by making it plural sometimes.
Lots of hands. Sarah Siegel.
Thanks. I'm noticing in the Mitsudah and in Levy's, they agree. It's where am I? It's so small. It's so hard to read. V'dover emet b'libo, and speaks truth in his heart. That's in Mitsudah, and here too. Whereas Alter put the, who speaks the truth in their heart. And I think it's hugely different. Who speak truth in their heart could really mean like, I have to be honest with myself and not even speaking it aloud. And I just want to make a parallel. I can't get it out of my head. I just read Louise Fitzhugh's biography. She was
I'm so eager to read it. Is it good?
Fantastic. But so she, it turns out, was a huge lesbian. She wrote the Harriet the Spy children's novel that I loved. And there's a great, the Wall Street Journal did an amazing review of it, but here's the parallel to the Psalm. I'm quoting from the journal. Old Golly, who is given to high-minded quotation, recites Keats' dictum about truth and beauty, but also reminds Harriet of the restorative power of the white lie. Remember that writing is to put love in the world, not to use against your friends, she counsels, but to yourself, you must always tell the truth. And it turns out that, like, to yourself, you must always tell the truth, obviously is a piece of Louise Fitzhugh's early closeted life. So anyway, I find that we can interpret who speak the truth in their heart, and rather who speak truth in their heart to be, if you can't be openly lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, you know, at least speak truth in your heart.
Beautiful. That's beautiful. Levy in his commentary talks about this unblemished and this truth thing that I'll just read what he says. This is reminiscent of the first psalm, and that's why I've been talking about these two psalms are seen as both wisdom psalms and have some, it's really interesting to look at them together. The first psalm praises the human who has not walked in the counsel of the wicked. Remember that? The Hebrew tamim is rendered here unblemished, is often used to describe the kind of animal one is to offer as a korban, a sacrifice in the Mishkan, who speaks truth in their heart. Not only do such people speak truth aloud, but even their thoughts that no one actually hears expresses truth. The Malbim, who is a biblical commentary, asserted that this psalm describes people who walk inside the farthest limit of the law. In other words, beyond the scope of what the law requires. They're so praiseworthy. They go beyond. So not only what they say, but they really work on their thoughts internally, which is really hard work.
So we have a lot of hands. I'm going to go to some people who haven't said anything in the past couple of sessions. Noreen, Dean Dresser.
All right. I wanted to follow up because I was just very moved that both Levy and the Anakin had said truth in their heart. I was thinking about Senator Romney when he gave the speech on the floor.
Yeah.
And the thing he just drove is, it's like, we have to tell the truth.
Yeah.
And I think he knew who he was speaking to, and other people who I have seen so often where people get hung up in their own righteousness. They get into circular thinking and they get this cloud and they are so fist pumping others, egging them on, as opposed to being able to tell that truth to themselves. So I just wanted to say that I can't find anything more relevant because I think that allows you to walk humbly with God.
Yep, beautiful. It is a pretty powerful thing. The idea of how do you get to truth about yourself sometimes is pretty hard, right?
Regina Linder.
Yes, good morning.
Good morning.
I'm also struck by this parallel with the morning news that talks about not taking bribes that hurt the innocent and the role of our big corporate this morning in shutting
Wow,
off.
what a great connection.
Yeah. Plucked from the headlines again.
Yep, plucked from the headlines.
Betsy Immershine.
Hi, I'm struck in verse 1, the difference of using may and will in our different translations. May is a conditional, where will seems like it's open to everyone. And so it's interesting to me here that he sees, it's almost as if you have to do these things to be able to be in the tent. And so it has a very different perspective.
Yes, and that's why it's open to interpretation, because it's not the Hebrew text doesn't actually indicate which it is. The tense, or I'm not sure if we can call it tense of imperfect, can be read in either of those ways.
Karen Kropp, excuse me.
Yeah, hi. I'm also looking at the first verse, and I'm thinking about the kind of difference between spending time in the tent in the temporary way and dwelling on the mountain in a more permanent way, and looking at the list of things that will get you to this place. And some of them are easier than others, and some you would probably very easily not bribe people, but it might not be so easy to not go about with a wagging tongue, for example. So I'm kind of thinking about the fact that you might sometimes not be so welcome to live on the heights, but you can temporarily spend time in the tent, kind of depending on how well you're doing with the things that would make you sort of living that truth in a good way.
That's fantastic. Thanks.
Sue Rosansky.
Yes. Hi. Yeah, Rabbi, I can't get past this, they do not give out silver at interest. I mean, how do we, I don't understand how lending money at interest is not counter to this.
Well, so first of all, there are in the book of Devarim, in Deuteronomy, lending at interest is to other Jews is forbidden. It's against Jewish law. As I said, the rabbis then came up with a way. It ended up, the rabbis understood that not allowing lending at interest meant people would not lend money, which was really hurting poor people. And so that is changed. That's a very famous example of rabbinic law, which finds a clever way to change the prohibition that's in the text itself.
So it was okay to lend money to Christians, but not to Jews?
Well, of course, Christians did, yes. There are many things in the Bible that are, of course, Christians didn't exist in the time of the Bible. So we're talking about tribes, really. And yes, there's Christians come about 1,000 years after the Bible exists. So for sure they weren't thinking about Christians or Muslims.
Right.
But their kind of own tribe. Yes, it was an economic reality.
And I mean,
but many people argue that lending with interest is actually a morally good thing to do. The question is whether it's usurious, whether it's You know, because if the lender doesn't have any get interest back, they're not going to lend the money, and that hurts poor people or
Well,
middle class
their
people.
choice to not lend the money. I mean, one could argue that they could lend the money. They don't have to charge interest to lend money. I mean, it's not.
I don't think the issue, and I think the rabbis are pretty clear. The issue is that people can make a living lending money. That's not a bad thing. The question is, what's the degree of the interest rate, so to speak? Is it something that will crush people? Are the terms absolutely evil, or are they fair?
Okay.
All right.
Certainly, you know, so I think, but that is a lot. That's a huge topic. The whole question of interest, and there's many things written about it. I've just summarized extremely briefly, but that could be that could be something to. If you're interested, I could give you more. There are a lot of articles. There's a lot of commentary on it because the question that's a great example of what the Bible says you can't lend an interest, and the rabbis change that with very clever caveats, but.
How convenient. Okay, thank you.
All right, we are down to our last minute, so let's to end in time. Let's go to back to Adria, and we'll be back on Psalm 15 tomorrow. Correct, Rabbi?
Yes, we'll continue tomorrow. We will do. I think both Mitchell and Fisher have Psalm 15s and Bernstein, so we're going to go through those three.
All right, and I will say that for 5 lines, this psalm punches above its weight, doesn't it?
It's a beautiful psalm.
And I'll also notice how far we've come, that I believe it was Linda Solomon who said in her first sentence, well, in my Chevruta, when I was studying this, I turned to my Metsuda version. And I thought we have come a pretty far way, baby, since that first class. So everyone.
What week are we up to, Harold?
I think this is 40 or 41. I don't know.
Yeah, okay.
It's like biblical counting, 1, 2, 3, 10.
Exactly, 40. In biblical counting, 40 generations, 40
right.
this, it just means big number.
All right, so Adria, over to you.
Beautiful. Thank you, Adria. Thank you all for a wonderful morning of study. So as I said, tomorrow we'll look at Fisher, at Mitchell, and Bernstein. Wonderful, everybody. Thanks so much for being here today. Be strong, have courage, speak the truth in your heart. It's going to be another interesting day in America, in the world. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you.
Hi, everybody.
Yeah. Sue?
Hey, hi, Ruth. I almost said Harriet. Even though I know who you are, I'm looking at how it's, yeah, anyway.
I'll talk to you further privately about this whole issue about interest and everything, because I have definite feelings, in terms of business, but I understand what you're talking about with the whole moral issue, and particularly about the fact that it's okay to do it for your own tribesmen to do that. It's not okay, I should say.
It's not okay.
Right.
But I mean, that is definitely offensive to me. But on the other hand, I do understand the need to make your money work for you, in a sense that you just can't. I mean, if you want to give charity, that's one thing, right? Then you just give it. But
right. Well, I guess what I was saying, or thinking is somehow if you, yeah, I mean, it's like a it's like a range. If you right, there's charity at one end, there's making a lot of money, off of people at the other end. And then, there are all the grades in the middle. So I guess lending money and making a moderate amount of interest would be somewhere in the middle. Lending money and making no interest would be somewhere in the middle. It's just not, you know what I mean? It's just not, it's not a way you would make a living. In other words,
have you ever heard of the Hebrew Free Loan Society? There is this organization that's been around for over 100 years, where loans are made from people in the community without interest. They just agree to repay the loan, and they have to have a sponsor. So basically, you need to get somebody who will guarantee that you'll repay the loan. So that's how it works, and that's been going on for a long time. I mean, so it is possible, but they don't give out big loans. They give out a $500 loan or $1,000 loan. But if you want to buy a house, then you need, several $100,000, and nobody's going to do that.
I didn't know about that.
I gotta ask.
Wait, really interesting.
So I just want to ask, is it really upsetting to you because of our stereotyping that's gone on over the centuries of the Jew as the money lender, or what's bugging you?
I'm being bugged. It is true. Yes. Not